1. The Winter Spirit's Revenge. In the small village of Greystone, nestled deep in the snow-covered woods, the holiday season was a time of community and warmth. The townsfolk looked forward to the Christmas concert in the grand old church, where families would gather, singing carols and sharing stories of past winters. But this year, a dark presence seemed to hang over the village. Old Mrs. Hawthorne, the town's historian, always spoke of the winter spirit in hushed tones, warning the children to be cautious around the woods. According to her, the spirit was a guardian of ancient traditions. Violate them, and it would come to collect. The warnings were dismissed by most as superstitious nonsense, but not by everyone. The Renshaw family, new to Greystone, decided to host their first Christmas in the village. They were excited to experience the quaint traditions and picturesque scenery, but were also eager to show off their new home to their friends and family. When they moved in, they noticed an old, decrepit tree standing at the edge of their property, its branches twisted and gnarled like long, skeletal fingers. They laughed it off as part of the local lore and began to decorate for Christmas. On Christmas Eve, the entire village gathered for the concert in the church. The Renshaws, eager to fit in, joined the chorus of carolers. As they sang, the old familiar tunes took on a new, haunting quality. The voices of the carolers seemed to echo unnaturally, reverberating off the walls in a way that made the candles flicker and shadows dance. The Renshaws tried to ignore it, attributing it to the acoustics of the old building. After the concert, Mrs. Hawthorne approached them, her eyes grave. "You shouldn't have done it," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the din of the departing crowd. "You should never have cut down that tree." The Renshaws exchanged confused glances but shrugged it off, assuming she was merely eccentric. That night, the house felt unusually cold. The children woke up crying, insisting they saw a shadow moving at the foot of their beds. The parents tried to reassure them, but as the night wore on, the temperature dropped steadily, the warmth escaping from the house as though drawn away by an unseen force. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The Renshaws hesitated, exchanging nervous glances before the father went to answer it. Standing on the doorstep was an old man, his eyes bright and piercing, his clothes old-fashioned. "I need shelter for the night," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Please." The Renshaws, feeling a mix of pity and unease, let him in. As he crossed the threshold, the warmth in the house dropped by several degrees. The man didn't speak much, only sat by the fire, staring into the flames with a distant expression. As the hours passed, the family could hear strange noises, whispering voices, the sound of scratching against the walls. When the clock struck midnight, the fire in the hearth extinguished with a loud pop, leaving the room in total darkness. The old man raised his head, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "You shouldn't have cut it down," he said again, his voice stronger now, more certain. The family tried to move, but their limbs felt heavy, as though a blanket of frost had settled over their muscles. The old man rose slowly, his eyes never leaving them, and walked toward the tree. As he approached, the branches seemed to reach out, curling around him like hands. He disappeared into the shadows, and a chilling scream echoed through the house. By morning, the Renshaws were gone, taken by the winter spirit for violating the sacred boundaries of the woods. The house was abandoned, its windows frozen over from the inside, and no one dared to approach it for fear of being drawn into the same dark fate. 2. The Haunted Caroler. In the city of Harrington, Christmas was synonymous with carolers. It was a time when the streets were filled with the sound of music, joyous, familiar carols that seemed to bring the whole city together. But on Christmas Eve, a strange tradition began that no one talked about. Carolers who appeared only once, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their faces hidden beneath hoods. It started with the Martin family, who were excited to host a gathering for friends and family. They had set up their house with lights, decorations, and a large Christmas tree in the corner of the living room. The children were nestled in bed, their eyes heavy with sleep, as the adults gathered in the dining room for eggnog and laughter. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The father, Martin, went to answer it, expecting to find more friends or perhaps some carolers from the neighborhood. Instead, he found himself face to face with a group of hooded figures, their heads bowed as though in prayer. "Would you like to hear a song?" one of them asked, his voice soft and melodic. Martin hesitated, then stepped aside to let them in. The carolers were silent as they entered, their footsteps barely making a sound on the hardwood floors. They arranged themselves around the tree, facing outward, their heads still bowed. As they began to sing, the room grew colder. The heat seemed to drain away, leaving behind an icy stillness. The music was beautiful, but unsettling. Notes that seemed to linger in the air, each phrase stretched out longer than it should be. Martin's wife, Karen, tried to interrupt, but no sound came from her lips. The carolers paid her no mind, continuing their song as though nothing had happened. The children, still asleep upstairs, began to whimper in their beds, their little fingers curling into fists. The carolers' heads began to rise, their eyes glowing with a strange light. Martin's heart raced as he realized the carolers were not human. They were something else entirely. Without warning, the music stopped, and the carolers lifted their heads. Their eyes were no longer glowing. Instead, they were hollow, empty. "We have come for what was promised," one of them said, his voice flat and without emotion. Martin tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The carolers moved as one, stepping toward him and Karen, who were frozen in place. The room seemed to contract around them, the walls closing in, the air growing thick with the sound of whispered prayers. The carolers reached out, their fingers brushing against the skin of Martin's arms and Karen's neck. And then they were gone, vanished into the night. The house was silent, the air still cold. The Martins were found the next morning, their bodies stiff and frozen, their eyes wide open in terror. The Christmas tree was bare, its branches empty. 3. The gift that watched. Mia's family had always been the last to put up their Christmas decorations. Every year, her mother insisted on the perfect tree, spending hours combing through the branches for the straightest, most symmetrical ones. But this year, Mia had different plans. She had found an old, dusty attic filled with forgotten treasures, broken toys, faded photographs, and boxes of memories. As she explored, she found a beautiful, intricately wrapped gift hidden at the back, away from prying eyes. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it, expecting to find a piece of jewelry, perhaps a gift from her late grandmother. Instead, she found a delicate snow globe. The globe was perfect, depicting a cozy cabin in a snow-covered clearing. When Mia shook it, the snow fell in slow, controlled flurries. The lights inside the cabin flickered, as though lit by a fire. There was a strange, comforting warmth to it, and Mia kept it on her nightstand, unable to resist its charm. That night, she heard the faintest whispering coming from the globe. At first, it was just background noise like the wind outside. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. Mia would sit for hours, listening to the faint voices, her heart beating faster with each word. One evening, she was sitting alone in her room when the globe's lights dimmed, casting strange shadows on the walls. The whispers turned into screams, and Mia could see shapes moving within the cabin, distorted and frightening. The air in the room grew colder, and Mia's breath fogged in front of her face. Suddenly, the door to her room creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was the man from the globe, a tall, gaunt figure dressed in old-fashioned clothes. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale as snow. "You shouldn't have touched it," he said softly, his voice echoing in Mia's ears. Mia tried to move, but her body was frozen in place. The man moved closer, his eyes fixed on the snow globe. "You've awakened something that shouldn't be disturbed," he continued, his voice low and menacing. "Now it's hungry." As he reached out for the globe, the lights inside it flickered and then went dark. The man reached into the globe, his fingers disappearing into the darkness. Mia screamed, the sound echoing in the room as the lights came back on, brighter than before.